The Mannequin factory sat at the edge of town like a forgotten relic, its peeling paint and rusted gates blending into the industrial wasteland around it. To most people, it was just another abandoned building, a silent shell of a once thriving business. But for one man, it became something far darker, a hiding place for a secret too gruesome to face in daylight. It began on a cold October night. The streets were wet from an earlier rain, and the dim orange glow of street lamps reflected off the pavement. Inside a cramped one-bedroom apartment, a woman named Claire Donovan stopped answering her phone. Friends thought she'd simply gone to bed early. By morning, her landlord noticed the door slightly ajar. When police arrived, they found the apartment in perfect order, except for one thing: Claire was gone. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Just an eerie quietness, like the air was holding its breath. Somewhere across town, a man named Martin Hale was dragging a large, black-wrapped bundle into the shadow of the Mannequin factory. Martin Hale was the kind of man you'd pass on the street without remembering. Mid-40s, average build, worked odd jobs. In his youth, he'd been an employee at the very same Mannequin factory before it shut down. When it closed, he never really left. Over the years, he'd returned there often, not to steal, but to wander through the dusty aisles of headless, armless forms as if visiting old friends. To his neighbors, Martin was polite, quiet, maybe a little strange. He didn't date, didn't go out much. Nobody knew about the soundproof basement beneath the factory floor, or that he'd been there late at night carrying things that didn't belong. The police weren't looking at him. They were still trying to figure out if Claire had left voluntarily. But Martin had already made sure no one would find her, at least, not easily. The thing about mannequins is that they are designed to mimic life. In dim light, they look like frozen people. Martin knew this better than anyone. That's why the factory was perfect. Rows of pale plastic figures, some with painted faces, some with chipped eyes, all standing in eerie silence. If you placed something among them, no one would notice at first glance. Martin wrapped Claire's body in layers of industrial plastic and fitted it into a standing frame. From a distance, she looked like another mannequin, her features obscured under a layer of primer spray paint. Even if someone stumbled inside, they'd walk right past her. But there was a problem Martin hadn't counted on. The factory wasn't as forgotten as he thought. A security guard named Elias Trent had been hired by the property's absentee owner to occasionally check on the place. Most of the time, Elias only did quick drive-bys, shining a flashlight through the windows and leaving. But that week, he'd been instructed to do a full walkthrough due to reports of trespassers. On his second night of rounds, Elias stepped inside the cold, echoing factory. His boots clicked on the concrete floor, the sound bouncing between walls lined with human-like shapes. He swept his flashlight across the figures, dozens of mannequins staring blankly into the darkness. Then his light paused on one in the back. Something about it seemed off. The angle of the neck, the slight bulge under the plastic. He frowned, but then shook his head. He was tired, imagining things. He finished his sweep and locked up, unaware that he'd just looked directly at Claire Donovan. Before she became a lifeless form in a factory, Claire was a vibrant, outspoken 32-year-old who worked as a freelance photographer. She had a habit of chasing strange subjects, abandoned buildings, street performers, and yes, even mannequins in thrift shop windows. Friends described her as fearless, but also trusting to a fault. 2 weeks before she disappeared, she had met Martin while photographing the outside of the Mannequin factory for a personal project. He told her he used to work there. They chatted. He offered to give her a private tour of the inside one day. Police would later realize that invitation had been the first step in her final walk into danger. Claire's last known movements were pieced together through security cameras and witness accounts. Around 9:30 p.m., she was seen leaving a cafe downtown. At 10:15, a neighbor saw her entering her apartment. At 11:05, a grainy camera from across the street caught a man in a dark jacket knocking on her door. That was Martin. What happened between 11:05 and midnight would never be fully understood. There were no signs of a fight, no shattered glass. The theory was that Martin convinced her to come with him, possibly under the pretense of retrieving something she'd left at the factory during her earlier visit. She walked out willingly. She didn't come back. By the third day, Claire's disappearance was all over local news. Flyers went up. Volunteers searched parks, alleys, and abandoned lots. The Mannequin factory was briefly mentioned in a local online forum, with one user posting, "That place has always creeped me out. Wouldn't be surprised if something bad happened there." Still, the police had no probable cause to enter. The owner claimed the building was locked and vacant. Martin, keeping up appearances, even joined one of the community search groups, quietly walking past Claire's missing posters without a flicker of guilt. 4 days later, Elias Trent returned for another round of checks. This time, something hit him the second he stepped inside, a faint but unmistakable smell. It was sweet and sour all at once, the kind of scent that clung to the back of your throat. He traced it toward the far end of the factory, his flashlight skimming across mannequin faces until it landed on that one again. The smell was stronger here. Elias took a step closer, squinting. There was a tiny drip at the base of the figure, darkened against the dusty concrete. His chest tightened. He backed away quickly, locked the door, and called the property owner, who brushed it off as old chemicals leaking. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something human was hidden in plain sight. While Martin thought he was careful, he made one mistake. He was seen leaving the factory at 3 a.m. carrying a large plastic bag. A homeless man named Daryl, who sometimes slept near the industrial park, noticed and later told police. It didn't look like trash. Too heavy. He was real nervous, looking around. That tip wasn't enough for a warrant, but it put Martin's name on a quiet watch list. Detectives began to check his background, finding old reports of odd behavior and a dismissed complaint from a co-worker years ago about him following her home. On the 7th day after Claire's disappearance, heavy rain swept through the city, causing flooding in parts of the industrial district. Water leaked into the Mannequin factory, and the property owner requested emergency repairs. This meant workers would be going inside, for the first time in months, without Martin knowing. One worker moved a stack of mannequins to clear the floor space. That's when he froze. The figure in the back corner wasn't light like the others. It sagged slightly at the joints, and under the paint, something fleshy was peeking through. Within hours, the factory was swarming with police. The workers didn't know whether to scream or vomit. One of them, trembling, pulled back the plastic. The sight beneath made his knees give way, pale skin mottled with decay, lifeless eyes half-shielded by streaks of primer paint. Claire Donovan had been standing there for a week, mistaken for an object. Police arrived fast, taping off the factory and photographing the macabre scene. The smell was overwhelming now, amplified by the heat of the repair equipment. A detective muttered. He wanted her to disappear without disappearing. Whoever had done this hadn't just hidden a body, they'd turned it into part of the scenery. Detectives found Martin Hale within hours. He was sitting at a diner counter, sipping coffee as though nothing had happened. When told the police wanted to talk, he didn't resist. He didn't even ask why. In the interview room, he answered questions softly, like they were inconveniences. "I haven't been in that place for months," he claimed. But his shoes, confiscated on the spot, told another story. Tiny flecks of the factory's unique paint compound clung to the soles. Still, Martin showed no emotion, no fear. Just a faint, almost bored smile. While crime scene techs processed the factory floor, a detective spotted a trapdoor near the back wall. It was partially concealed by stacked mannequin torsos. When they pried it open, a steep wooden staircase descended into darkness. The basement was worse. Rows of mannequins stood like silent sentries, but these were different. Some were cracked, others headless, some discolored by strange stains. In one corner was a workbench littered with tools, saws, clamps, duct tape, and half-empty cans of primer. And there, in the dust, was a bracelet, silver, engraved with the name Claire. The forensic team worked for 36 hours straight. They collected DNA from the tools, found fingerprints on the plastic wrap, and even pulled partial shoe prints from the dust. But the most chilling evidence came from an old Polaroid camera on the workbench. Inside were photos, not of the mannequins as store props, but of them posed in disturbing, human-like scenarios. In one, a figure was slumped in a chair, its head tilted as if unconscious. In another, a mannequin's hand clutched a lock of real human hair. And then there was a photo of Claire, taken before the paint covered her face. A criminal profiler joined the case, calling Martin's actions a merging of reality and objectification. He wasn't just hiding the body, he was making it part of a world he could control. The factory, once his place of employment, had become a sanctuary for his fantasies. To Martin, mannequins weren't lifeless forms. They were blank slates he could dress, pose, and control without resistance. Claire's murder wasn't just about ending her life. It was about transforming her into a thing. This was more than concealment. It was possession. For days, Martin said nothing incriminating. Detectives cycled through questioning strategies, trying to push him off balance. Then, on the fourth day, they brought in the photographs. They slid the picture of Claire across the table. Martin's hand twitched. His eyes lingered on the image for just a second too long. Finally, he spoke. She looked better than the rest. The room went cold. Detectives knew then, this wasn't about impulse or panic. This was about obsession. When Martin Hale's trial began, the prosecution laid out every grim detail. Jurors heard about the hidden basement, the tools, the photographs. They saw the Polaroid of Claire, the paint still drying on her face. But the defense argued insanity, claiming Martin's time at the factory had warped his sense of reality. They painted him as a lonely man whose isolation and mental illness led him to confuse life with lifelessness. The jury didn't buy it. The cold calculation, the deception, the lack of remorse, all of it pointed to someone who knew exactly what he was doing. On the 12th day of deliberations, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Martin was sentenced to life without parole. As the judge read the sentence, Martin didn't flinch. He didn't look at Claire's family. He only turned to the prosecutor and said, "You'll never understand what I made." For the Donovan family, justice felt hollow. Nothing could undo the nightmare of knowing their daughter had stood in a factory for days, mistaken for an object. After the trial, the Mannequin factory was slated for demolition. But before it was torn down, urban explorers tried to break in, filming eerie footage of the untouched basement. In their videos, the mannequins stood in their dust-covered positions, as if still waiting for someone to arrange them. Claire's parents fought to have the site cleared before demolition, fearing it would become a morbid attraction. Eventually, the building came down, but the story lingered in whispers. Even now, locals say the ground where it stood feels colder than the rest of the block. Claire Donovan's case became a grim reminder of how danger can hide in the most ordinary places. The factory wasn't deep in the woods. It wasn't a hidden bunker. It was a building anyone could see, standing on a public street. Her story warns us that predators don't always drag their victims into the shadows. Sometimes, they stand them up in the light, hiding them in plain sight. If you're watching this, remember, trust your instincts, stay aware of your surroundings, and never ignore that small voice that says something feels off. Because in the wrong hands, even the most lifeless setting can become a grave.